I thought it was just her laugh, until she noticed my heart racing. It was one of those casual weekend gatherings at my friend's house, nothing fancy, just a few people talking, laughing, and drifting in and out of conversations. I remember seeing her for the first time almost in passing. My friend's aunt. I had heard about her before, of course, but seeing her in person, it was different. There was a subtle magnetism in the way she moved through the room, effortless yet deliberate, as if every gesture had its own quiet grace. I noticed her laugh first. It wasn't loud or flashy, but warm and soft, the kind that makes a space feel lighter when it passes through. She caught me staring, I didn't even realize I was, and she gave me this playful, knowing smile that made my chest tighten in a way that felt both foreign and exhilarating. Then came the teasing remark, almost casual, almost accidental, but it hit me in a way I couldn't ignore. Your heart's racing already? Adorable. I could feel my face warm. My pulse quickened. Her voice had this gentle confidence that made it impossible not to pay attention, and yet there was a vulnerability in her eyes, subtle but present, that made her feel human, real. She handed me a drink, our fingers brushing for just a second, and it was enough to send an unexpected shiver through me. I noticed the warmth of her hand, the smoothness of her skin, and the calm steadiness of her grip. Everything about her seemed deliberate yet natural, the tilt of her head as she laughed, the way her hair caught the light, the soft sway of her shoulders when she leaned casually against the counter. Even the faint scent of her perfume, floral but understated, lingered longer than it should have in the air around me. I found myself acutely aware of every small gesture, every fleeting glance, every subtle nuance in the way she carried herself. At that moment, I realized this wasn't just a passing curiosity. There was something about her presence that stirred me in ways I couldn't immediately name. I wanted to know more, about her laugh, her thoughts, the stories behind her quiet confidence. I wanted to linger in the small spaces between words, to catch those fleeting glances again and again. By the time I left that first encounter, my mind was replaying the moment over and over, her smile, her teasing, that simple brush of her hand. It was confusing, exhilarating, and impossible to ignore. And somewhere beneath all of it, I felt the first spark of something I wasn't ready to define, but I knew it had already begun. After that first encounter, I kept finding myself noticing her more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just her presence in a room, it was the way she seemed to make the space around her feel warmer, softer, somehow alive with subtle energy. The next few encounters were brief, almost accidental, but each one left an impression that lingered far longer than I expected. The first of these was at my friend's kitchen table. I had arrived early, thinking I'd just grab a quick cup of coffee before anyone else showed up. She was already there, arranging pastries on a small plate. She glanced up, and our eyes met, just for a fraction of a second, but it felt weighty. That same teasing smile tugged at the corners of her lips. She didn't say anything about my earlier reaction, but I could feel it in the air, a quiet acknowledgement that she had noticed and perhaps found it amusing. I tried to focus on pouring my coffee, but my attention kept drifting. I watched her hands as she worked, the graceful sweep of her fingers, the delicate way she lifted the pastries. Even small movements seemed magnetic. When she spoke, I noticed the warmth in her tone, the gentle cadence of her voice that made even mundane words feel intimate. I stumbled over my own words more than once, and she laughed softly, tilting her head just enough to make the moment feel light, teasing, yet strangely personal. Then there were the accidental touches. She leaned over to reach for something, and our arms brushed, a brief, innocent contact that left a lingering warmth. My chest tightened. My mind raced, but she acted as though nothing had happened, casually moving on with a smile that seemed to say, I noticed, and I like that you noticed too. It was thrilling, confusing, and completely disarming all at once. I noticed little things too, the way her hair fell naturally across her shoulders, catching the morning light, the subtle scent of her perfume that followed her even when she moved across the room, the quiet assurance in her posture that contrasted with the gentle vulnerability in her eyes when she smiled at me. Each detail piled on, each glance stretched a heartbeat, each laugh felt like it was meant just for me. By the end of that morning, I realized something had shifted. I was more aware of her presence than ever, more conscious of my own reactions, more curious about the thoughts behind her eyes. Every encounter, no matter how brief or accidental, left me feeling both exhilarated and awkwardly exposed, like I was standing on the edge of something I didn't fully understand but desperately wanted to explore. It happened one quiet afternoon, the kind where the world seems to slow down just enough for small moments to matter. I was sitting on the park bench near the edge of the pond, pretending to read, but mostly watching the ducks drift lazily across the water. She appeared almost silently, as though she had known I'd be here, and a warm wave of surprise swept over me. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, her voice soft, yet carrying that familiar undertone of confident ease. I gestured awkwardly, my pulse quickening, and she lowered herself onto the bench beside me. There was space between us at first, polite, respectful, but the air around us felt charged, as if each pause in conversation stretched out longer than it should have. We started talking about trivial things, the changing leaves, the unexpected chill in the air, a new book she had read, but slowly, the conversation slipped into something deeper. She shared a memory, quiet and tender, about a regret from years ago, something she had never mentioned to anyone before. Her voice faltered just slightly, and I noticed the faint tremor in her hands as they rested on her lap. Without thinking, I reached out, lightly brushing my fingers against hers, a silent gesture of reassurance. She didn't pull away, instead, she let the contact linger just long enough to make me aware of the warmth of her skin, the gentle steadiness beneath my touch. I felt the same way, unguarded, nervous, and yet, somehow, safe. She asked about my own life in a tone that was both curious and patient, and I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected. Words came easier than I thought they would, and each admission seemed to draw us closer, folding our separate worlds into this quiet shared space. Even the small gestures carried meaning. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and I noticed the subtle brush of her fingers against her cheek. When she laughed, it wasn't just a sound, it was a vibration that seemed to echo between us, settling softly in my chest. I became acutely aware of her presence beside me, the warmth radiating from her, the subtle scent of her perfume mixing with the crisp autumn air. By the time we stood to leave, there was an unspoken understanding between us. No grand declarations, no overt gestures, just the quiet recognition of connection. A fleeting brush of hands as she adjusted her bag, a small tilt of her head toward me when she smiled, and the gentle, lingering look in her eyes as we parted. That day, I realized that something was beginning to grow, a quiet, patient, slow-burning intimacy that neither of us could ignore, a bond built not on words, but on shared vulnerabilities and the comfort of being truly seen. Over the next few weeks, circumstances kept putting us in closer proximity than either of us expected. It started small, sharing a ride when my friend couldn't drive, both of us, studying together for a group project, lingering in the same quiet corner at gatherings, but each instance felt like a test of restraint. The space between us seemed smaller every time, and I became acutely aware of every subtle detail, the curve of her shoulder when she leaned over, the scent of her perfume that drifted closer than it should, the warmth radiating from her even in casual conversation. There was one afternoon I remember vividly. We had volunteered to help set up decorations for a small community event. Leaning over the table to adjust a string of lights, our arms brushed, a fleeting contact, but enough to send a current up my spine. I could feel her warmth through the light fabric of her sweater, hear the small intake of her breath, and sense the unspoken acknowledgement hanging between us. She smiled at me over her shoulder, that same teasing, knowing smile, and my chest tightened, betraying the rush of excitement and nerves I tried to hide. Even in moments that seemed mundane, there was a quiet electricity. She would reach for a pen or a notebook, and our fingers would graze. She would brush past me to grab a cup of coffee, and I'd catch the faint hint of her perfume clinging to my senses. The simplest gestures, leaning in to hear a word, adjusting something together, laughing at a shared joke, felt charged. I became hyper-aware of how close she was, how her presence seemed to bend time, drawing me in despite the voice in my head reminding me to stay composed. And yet, there was a gentle balance in it all. She never pressed, never invaded boundaries, her confidence was paired with a quiet respect. That combination made every touch, every glance, every fleeting brush of arms feel intimate without a single word of romance being spoken. I found myself lingering on her expressions, the way her eyes softened when she laughed, the small gestures that revealed her warmth, the delicate way she would adjust her hair or tuck it behind her ear. By the end of that day, I realized something profound: proximity wasn't just physical. Every shared space, every accidental touch, every moment spent near her was building tension, a slow, simmering anticipation that neither of us fully acknowledged but both felt. It wasn't urgent, it wasn't loud, it was subtle, patient, and irresistible. And in that quiet tension, I began to understand that the line between admiration and something more was blurring, one fleeting touch at a time. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the world feels soft and slow, and every small sound seems amplified, the rustle of leaves, distant laughter, the occasional clink of cups from a nearby cafe. We had gone for a walk together after dinner, almost by instinct, neither of us saying much at first. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, in fact, it felt like its own kind of conversation. Every step we took, side by side, brought an awareness of each other that words could never capture. The streetlights cast a warm, amber glow, softening the edges of the world and painting her face in gentle light. I couldn't stop noticing the way her hair caught the glow, the subtle curve of her cheek when she glanced at something in the distance, the way her eyes softened when she looked at me. Each detail seemed magnified, and I felt my pulse quicken without her having to say a single word. We paused near a small fountain, and our eyes met in that quiet, fleeting way that left the rest of the world fading into the background. I became acutely aware of the space between us, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the evening air. My hand brushed hers accidentally, a fleeting touch that lingered just long enough for me to feel the steady, gentle heat of her skin. She didn't pull away, instead, she let it rest, her fingers brushing mine almost imperceptibly. In that moment, everything felt suspended. Time slowed. I noticed the rhythm of her breathing, the faint tremor in her smile, the subtle way she shifted closer without even realizing it. There were no words, no declarations, just the quiet, mutual acknowledgement of something growing between us, an attraction tempered by respect, a desire softened by the slow, patient unfolding of connection. I realized then that silence could carry more meaning than words ever could. A glance could speak volumes. A brush of fingers could ignite a quiet fire. A shared smile could reveal emotions neither of us were ready to voice. That evening, in the gentle glow of streetlights and soft sounds of the night, we understood each other in a way that didn't need speech, a silent connection, electric and tender, that left my heart racing and my mind impossibly aware of her presence. By the time we parted for the night, there was a quiet promise hanging in the air. Neither of us needed to name it, yet both of us felt it, the pull, the tension, the slow-burning flame of something neither entirely understood but both wanted to explore. The moment came quietly, without fanfare or dramatic build-up, just the two of us, sitting across from each other on a worn wooden bench at the edge of the park. The sky had begun to blush with the first hints of sunset, and the world seemed to shrink around us, leaving only the warmth of her presence and the steady thrum of my own heartbeat. We had been talking about everything and nothing, the kind of conversation that drifts effortlessly when both people feel seen. But beneath the casual words, I felt something heavier, a tension I could no longer ignore. I glanced at her, noticing the subtle way her fingers twined in her lap, the soft tilt of her head as she listened. The gentle curve of her smile tugged at something inside me, and I realized how long I'd been holding back, how much I wanted to bridge the space between us, even just a little. I really enjoy spending time with you, I said quietly, my voice low, almost hesitant. I avoided her eyes at first, afraid of what I might see reflected there, amusement, pity, or something I wasn't ready to face. But when I finally looked up, her expression was soft, patient, and encouraging, like she had been waiting for me to find the courage to speak. There was a brief pause, heavy with the unsaid, and then she reached out, her hand brushing mine lightly. The touch was electric yet gentle, a quiet affirmation that whatever I was feeling wasn't misplaced. "I enjoy it too," she said softly, her voice carrying that same warmth I had been drawn to from the beginning. "More than you probably realize." That simple acknowledgement was enough to unravel all the tension I had been holding inside. We laughed softly at the awkwardness of words failing us, our fingers lingering together naturally, like two puzzle pieces fitting into place. The world outside continued its quiet rhythm, but for those moments, it felt like time had slowed, and all that mattered was this shared, fragile honesty. I noticed every detail about her, the way her hair fell across her shoulders, the subtle scent of her perfume mixing with the evening air, the quiet steadiness in her hand as she held mine. It was a moment of connection deeper than attraction, a gentle crossing of emotional boundaries that had been slowly forming for weeks. By the time we stood to leave, there was a shared understanding between us, no grand declarations, no dramatic gestures, just a quiet promise that this connection, fragile and tentative as it might be, was mutual. Every glance, every soft smile, every lingering touch spoke volumes, and for the first time, I felt the overwhelming sense of being truly seen, and truly known, by someone who had become unexpectedly indispensable. The final moments of our story didn't arrive with fireworks or dramatic confessions. They came quietly, in the kind of evening that feels suspended between reality and memory. We found ourselves alone on the sofa in my friend's living room, the golden glow of the lamp casting soft shadows around us. I could feel her presence as if it had been there all along, a gentle warmth beside me, grounding and steady. She shifted slightly, leaning closer, and for the first time, I noticed the way her head naturally rested near my shoulder. My own breath caught, and I felt the subtle rise and fall of her chest against mine. It was intimate, yet safe, a closeness that spoke of trust and understanding rather than urgency or expectation. The faint scent of her perfume mingled with the quiet of the room, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized I had been longing for. We didn't speak at first. Our hands found each other instinctively, fingers weaving together in a natural, unspoken rhythm. Every tiny gesture, the soft squeeze of her hand, the way our knees brushed when we shifted, the tilt of her head as she smiled up at me, carried volumes. I noticed her laugh, low and warm, the subtle way her eyes crinkled at the corners, and the gentle cadence of her voice as she murmured something about the day's events. Each detail drew me deeper into the moment, into the realization that this bond we had been building, so quietly and carefully, had blossomed into something profoundly comforting and rare. There was no rush, no need to define what we had. The weeks of tentative glances, accidental touches, and shared silences had already said everything. We lingered in the sofa's soft embrace, our conversation drifting into light-hearted banter, punctuated with small touches, a hand on a shoulder, a nudge when laughing, a brief brush of hair from her cheek. Every movement was infused with care, with affection, with the quiet knowledge that we were both exactly where we wanted to be. Finally, as the evening drew to a close, she looked at me and smiled that familiar, knowing smile. Her eyes held warmth, amusement, and a softness I had come to crave. I squeezed her hand gently, feeling the steady beat of her pulse beneath my fingers. In that moment, it didn't matter that we came from different places in life, that our ages differed, or that the world might whisper doubts. What mattered was this: two people, quietly and naturally, finding a connection that felt like home. We stayed close, savoring the stillness and the quiet intimacy that had grown between us. And for the first time, I felt the kind of fulfillment that isn't loud or dramatic, but steady, warm, and enduring, the realization that slow, careful love, built on trust and understanding, could feel this perfect, this real, and this right. If you felt the tension, the small touches, and the quiet moments between them, make sure to watch the full story. The journey doesn't end here. Click the link in the description and experience the slow burn romance in all its warmth and emotion.